Fairchild Semiconductor sort of fell apart, mainly because Shockley kept all the equity to himself, and then a bunch of those guys separated out and started another firm, and that was the first time the concept of giving equity to startup employees was kind of started. So, and what's interesting about that is that date predates any of the business management science approach to optimizing, incentivizing people. Welcome to Telltales. I'm Mike Nicoletti. Every week, along with my co-hosts Jason Wallace and Hunt Lawrence, we bring you the cash flow memo. Get it at telltales.us. For the next 30 minutes, we're going to dive deep into energy, technology, and healthcare. So download the memo now and get started.
The following conversation is intended for informational purposes only. You should always do your own work to determine if an investment is suitable for you.
I want to go through Exhibit C in a little more detail this afternoon. I'm going to not take more than a couple of minutes, but I'm going to approach it differently. If you look at liquid fuel consumption, which is the bottom two-thirds of the graph of the page, liquid fuels consumption, mostly oil, but other fuels, is supposed to go up by 1 million barrels a day. If you cite up, we have U.S. up a little, everything else flat, a little bit of increase in other Asia, a little bit of increase in the Middle East, but it's very, very flat. Is this oil demand subject to tariffs or worldwide recession or any other macro activity? I don't think so. I think this is something that's pretty reliable. The problem is in the supply side. And when you see the demand side for 25, 103.9 million barrels a day. The supply side is 103.7. So you'll have a little bit of withdrawal from inventory, but it pretty much balances out. Then the question is, where's the supply going to come from? U.S. is now flat, and there are now predictions that the U.S. will be down by 300,000 barrels or so. And that's because of lower prices. The price of oil is a full $10 lower this year than it was last year. Saudi Arabia is up because OPEC Plus is restoring its 2.1 million barrels. Now, if Saudi Arabia went up by its share of the 2.1 million barrels, it would be not higher than 9.7, but the increase didn't start until May. And so I think that's a pretty good number. Russia's flat. That assumes the U.S. continues to go easy on sanctions, despite Putin's non-cooperation on Ukraine. Iraq is up a little, UAE's up a little, Iran's down a little from last year. But I think that 103.7 is pretty solid on the supply. Problem is that there's 3.5 million barrels of extra capacity. To the extent that OPEC Plus continues with their program to restore their 2.1 million barrels, or to the extent that has a voluntary additional 1 million barrels a day, puts that into the market, we are going to have lower prices. And it doesn't have anything to do with tariffs or recession conditions. It's just supply and demand. It's not likely that there'll be anything more in increase in demand other than 1 million barrels a day. So to get oil back to where it was last year in the low 70s for WTI is going to require some reduced supply or reduced extra capacity. That won't show up for 12 or 18 months, even at lower oil prices. I mean, U.S. production is not going to go down by 1 million barrels a day. It'll start sliding down, but that's just not the way it works. And I think that's true for other supply sources. So without Israel bombing Iran and Iran sending missiles into Saudi facilities, without the U.S. changing course and deciding they want to, put significant sanctions in on Russia. This is the way the oil market works. And as an oil stock investor, it's not the end of the world. We'll get to it later, but I think it's pretty well reflected in the oil producing stocks. While oil demand and pricing, oil pricing is lower, gas pricing is holding up very well. If we go to page 2 and we look at average Henry Hub prices, it seems extraordinary now, but Henry Hub pricing for natural gas averaged $6 in 22 and then went into decline. $6 was the invasion of Ukraine and the theory that Europe was going to run out of gas. So LNG went up and U.S. gas pricing went up. It came all the way down and averaged $2.40 last year. It's $3.80 now. We're predicting $3.80 for 25. The 25 strip is $4. The 26 strip is $4.30. How reliable is that? Comes down again to supply. Demand has behaved fairly well. If you look at demand, say from 20 through 25, it's up significantly. I mean, it's up like 18 Bs a day. So the demand isn't the problem. The problem is supply went from 90, dry gas went from 90 to 106. So supply was going up as quickly as demand. Will the higher price result in more supply? Well, we do have production going, which was pretty flat, 24 versus 23. We do have it going up to 106. It's running 106 now. Here's an interesting thing. If you look at the gas supply paragraph, in the 11 Bs of increase from 21 to 24, the Permian was 7. That's all associated gas. With lower oil prices and less activity in the Permian, will that flatten out? It may. So it could be that recovery to the $4 range will hold, which is good if you're holding companies that are mostly gas producers. Exhibit A, again, I'm going to take a little extra time on Exhibit A because we slotted in here an estimated 26 forecast where the revenue number comes to 5.4 trillion. This is from individual income taxes, payroll tax, corporate income tax, excise, and others. The tariff will be in that excise and others category. That's up nicely from the estimate, the CBO estimate for the fiscal year we're in, of just over 5 trillion. But spending doesn't go up as much. Spending is going to be just under 7 trillion, and here it's 7.18. So the deficit comes from 1.93 trillion to 1.78. That's progress. But I think the capital markets, the U.S. government, the people who hold U.S. government bonds outside the U.S., were looking for more. More would require cuts in spending in the all other category, which does come down 120 billion. So, I mean, that's kind of the Doge and other ways to make things more efficient. That's good. Interest is up just because there's more debt and interest rates are somewhat higher. When you look at Social Security, that just kind of marches up each year. Medicare is up a little. Medicaid is held flat. I mean, these are not unreasonable numbers. I mean, this shows real effort at spending restraint, but the objective is to get the deficit down to 3% of GNP, and that would be $1 trillion. With this forecast for the fiscal year that starts next October 1, get down under 1.8. 1.8 is a long ways from $1 trillion even, but it is progress. Will this be enough to keep the capital markets from seizing up? Maybe. But for all of us as investors, we've had this huge recovery from the kind of the tariff-induced decline in stock market. It's certainly not a time to sell things, positions that you've owned, companies that you're very comfortable with. But if you're got cash that you want to commit, that you have found something you're interested in, I really think the most you should do is buy a half position make allowance for having some kind of capital market situation brought on by this deficit, where you might see the stock you're interested in or the set of stocks you're interested in at significantly lower values. So I think the watchword is follow it carefully. Any encouragement we can have to our politicians to work hard on getting that deficit down is very important. And, keep some dry powder in case there is a capital markets event and you have a 10 or 15% drawdown in equity values. Mike, Jason, anything else to add?
Hopefully that, the improvement in 26 gets, when we get to 27, maybe we're much closer to that $1 trillion deficit number.
Yeah, I don't see getting there. I see an improvement of 200 or 300 billion a year. So now the GNP is going up, so 3% of GNP gets to be. But I think if we could just change the trajectory a bit, that will be good. And maybe we'll hold off the term used in the capital markets of the bond vigilantes. Maybe we'll hold the bond vigilantes off. With that, we have a new feature. In addition to updating news on the companies we follow, especially the early part of the 20-page memo, is to devote 5 minutes, and we'll stop after 5 minutes and get to news, to the history of, if you think about what the front part of the memo is doing, it's chips, software, and biotech. So we're going to spend 5 minutes out of our 30 minutes each Wednesday kind of covering history to see if there are any patterns in the history that give us any guidance to patterns that we might see going forward. Mike and I were talking about, you'd have to go back to Bell Labs or something to go back far enough. This is before Fairchild. In subsequent Wednesdays, we're going to spend 5 or 6 minutes on this. We'll be doing this probably for half a year, and we'll be doing chips for a couple of weeks. But, you have to go way back to Bell Labs or something, right, to come up with the first,
vacuum tube computers, right?
Exactly. That's basically it. Is Bell Labs or AT&T? Bell Labs, the research arm of AT&T, was focused on finding a replacement for vacuum tubes.
What was the time frame here? Because I know a lot of compute was pushed forward for code breaking encryption.
So this was 1947.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. So in the middle of World War II.
Right.
I think Jason is right. Some part of this came out of the code breaking in World War II, I suppose.
Yeah, I'd imagine so, because presumably AT&T was involved in the war effort.
Oh yeah. So, and the researchers.
Right.
But yeah,
the researchers rolled into life after the war, and and this was, that was probably some of the impetus for developing the early tools.
Exactly. And what's interesting is like their first semiconductor. Well, first of all, it was one of the scientists that developed this first semiconductor in 1947 was William Shockley, who later left and started Fairchild Semiconductor, which is kind of the birth of Silicon Valley and the stories. Those people that were involved were like the key fundamental people that not only launched eventually Intel, but also the rest of the Silicon Valley ecosystem. And I guess if we think about some of those trends that were initially started in those first few years, is Fairchild Semiconductor sort of fell apart, mainly because Shockley kept all the equity to himself, and then a bunch of those guys separated out and started another firm, and that was the first time the concept of giving equity to startup employees was kind of started. So, and what's interesting about that is that date predates any of the business management science approach to optimizing, incentivizing people. So this was very much a bleeding edge idea for compensation and motivation that developed out of this whole semiconductor industry.
I think with my spending more time on exhibits A, B, and C and getting started on the history, I think we only have about 12 or 13 minutes left. I think we probably ought to move to page 1, recent news, so that we have some time to cover healthcare news. But for the people who listen in every Wednesday, we're determined to kind of go down through history patterns in chips, and then history patterns in software, and then history patterns in biotech. And we reserve the right to skip around. In other words, we might do history in chips one week, and we might switch over to biotech the next week, just wherever we think we have something that could be relevant to trying to decipher what's going to go on between now and several years from now. Jason, there was a lot of kind of Alphabet news and Microsoft news this week, all kind of impacting NVIDIA, because we have the CEO of Alphabet saying, well, he is training with their proprietary chip. So it is, but then saying in the same breath that, they admire NVIDIA, they admire Jensen, and they have plenty of GPUs for their cloud customers. Is this some kind of an inflection point, Jason, or what do you think?
I think it is, but not in the way that, Google's going to focus on TPUs. I think the inflection point is we're moving more towards all the models being reasoning based. And the reason that is when you have the reasoning, you're eliminating a lot of the hallucinations. So that problem kind of didn't entirely go away, but it's much more muted and kind of solved by these reasoning models. And we haven't, I haven't seen a lot of people discuss like, oh, we've solved this, but it just kind of went away because they've improved these algorithms so much. And the way that works is the outputs of one get fed into either another pass through the same model, or it goes to another model to check the output. So the way they're scaling up these models now is by having more passes through the inference engine. It's not by compute necessarily, or the size of the model. So as we make more and more of these new models, they're going to require more and more processing cycles. Google at their I/O conference, which is still going on, they showed off their Gemini agent mode, which was super impressive. You give it a task, it plans out, it's planned for work, and then you can send it off and let it go and do that. And that can take minutes to hours to complete. They had a number of other super interesting announcements. Their video generation models are getting very sophisticated. It can generate a script for, the cinematography, if you will, and create the dialogue, and it also will create sound effects and music to go with it. So that's kind of a first step we've seen in the video generation models. These companies are all announcing new coding tools, and they're all kind of similar, but they function just like a human on the team would. So they can connect to the place where you store all your source code. You can give the model a task, and with little direction, it will find the parts of the code it needs to change, make the changes, submit the changes, check them back into the code base, so then a human can review or test if they want. So it really does function like another teammate. You give them a task, and it figures out how to solve it, and it produces the code and checks it in using the same process that any other person would. So I think the use cases get more and more complex for these models, and then the compute required just goes up tremendously. Sundar did say, as you referenced there, that they're training their models on TPUs and they're hosting their models inference on TPUs. But he also said they do a lot of hosting of the Gemini models on NVIDIA GPUs. So I don't think we know why they do both. Maybe the latest Blackwell generation is better than TPUs. Maybe they just can't produce enough of them. Now, at this point now, everyone's converged on the best process that TSMC has developed, and they're all asking for that production capacity. So NVIDIA's doing it. Apple's always been first in line for it. AMD's asking for it. Google's asking for it. So it could be that they just don't have the capacity. And TSMC, to their credit, they've been doubling that capacity every year for the last, I want to say, 4 years.
How much in Arizona do you think is compared to Taiwan?
Well, I think the strategy, I don't know wafer count wise where they're at, but the intention there is to make that it's self-sustaining hub. So we expect to see that Arizona location continue to expand.
Yeah, it's a fraction of what they do in Taiwan, but it is also, they are building out the capability to make these latest generation.
It'll be pretty impressive when they announce like 100,000 wafer capacity fab in Arizona. That would be huge.
How do you think Intel's doing?
Well,
getting up to?
It's still lighting money on fire. So how are they doing? It's a good question. I mean, they don't have any customers yet. So, and knowing that NVIDIA would gladly have another source, right? Maybe some of the other ones would be less likely to desire another source, except that maybe they, as an alternative to not getting capacity elsewhere. But when you're as supply constrained as NVIDIA is, you would do anything to get more capacity. So I think you got to give, what's his name, Lip-Bhutan? Mm-hmm. You got to give him some time to right the ship there.
Do you think the total investment between Intel and TSMC in Arizona is more than $30 billion? Or, I mean, it must be a gigantic number at this point.
Yes.
Yeah, I think
definitely
TSMC in Arizona is close to that.
That makes sense. And TSMC is committed to something large over the next 10 years, another 150 or something like that.
Yeah.
Before we leave page one, though, we need to talk about Tesla. Musk reiterated that Colossus, the data center in Tennessee, is expected to expand to 1 million GPUs in 6 to 9 months, with an expected spend of $25 billion. So that is on a much shorter. Well, he had mentioned that number, 1 million GPUs, but he had not put a timeline around it. So that's a very short timeline. And I think represents 10, 15% of NVIDIA revenue over that period, if it's true. So that's kind of a big deal. The other thing is, and this just happened a few hours ago, OpenAI has announced that they're going to acquire Johnny Ive's startup, IO. And this kind of is something that OpenAI has been doing, is trying to push out important news when Google does something big. And Google really announced a lot of really impressive stuff the other day. And probably the biggest takeaway is that the integration of Google into their phones is going to be impressive. So this is sort of their attempt at, hey guys, we're working on something too. The big difference, I think, with this OpenAI announcement versus previous ones is it sort of seems like the Google announcements were more impactful for the first time than the ChatGPT ones.
Yeah, we were just talking before the call about, Google was getting their butt kicked a year ago in AI, and now maybe they're the market leader. Mm-hmm. But the interesting thing about the Johnny Ive project is they still haven't announced what the hardware device is, but they've given some clues that it's not going to displace the smartphone in the way that iPhones didn't displace laptops. And they also said it's not going to be like one of those humane AI pins that you talk to. So no idea what it's going to be, but they said it's a crazy ambitious project.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's take a quick break for a message from Oakcliff Sailing.
Hi, everybody. This is your weekly update. I skipped last week because we were a little bit busy filming a documentary on the America's Cup, including the women's team in '95, but it was so cool to have so many of the 1992 and 2000 sailors here. If you don't remember, 92 I was the only female, and 2000 was the best team ever because it was mixed, men and women sailing together and kicking ass. So, back to Oakcliff. We have the Round Block Island race, which rolls right into the Annapolis to Newport race coming up. Also, we are doing Sail GP in between that. Really cool is we're going to have the French team and some of their superstars out here on June 4th. I'll be in the city, and we have an exclusive VIP trip on Sunday. And there's just so much going on. But in the middle of all of that, I wrote a newsletter last week, which you can read online, and it has a whole bunch of stuff that's going on. And I put out a plea because I need help, because I'm doing all of this myself, it feels like, in terms of the marketing and the database, but I've gotten a lot of good responses from that. And finally, if you can go to racingcalendar.org and go to SailGP, there's an exclusive discount ticket price for you to go in the grandstands. And while I have not been at the New York Sale GP before, I have been told by reliable sources, Patrice, our regatta director, that it is probably the best way to see it is from land. On a boat, it's a little bit chaotic. So you go to racingcalendar.org, search for Sale Space GP. You'll see the event, click on the event, and there's a ticket discount code exclusively for Oakcliff and people that go to racingcalendar.org. See you soon somewhere on the East Coast. Bye.
And now back to the show.
Healthcare news, Jason.
Healthcare news. Well, real quick, Marty McCary at the FDA they have a series of podcasts, 30-minute calls, just like ours.
Slightly bigger audience.
Yeah, maybe. For now. No. But they're worth watching. You get insight into what they're thinking. I think they're only 2 episodes in. The second one was around regulation of food supply. But it's interesting to hear the commissioner talking about floating new ideas of how to shorten the duration of clinical trials, speed up that process, which makes it less expensive, less burdensome for the sponsors, the pharma companies. The other big news was out of Regeneron. One, they didn't have that great of a quarter last quarter, but the real news is that they won the auction to purchase 23andMe. And I think they're paying around $250 million, which is kind of a steal, I think. They're getting I want to say it's 15 million people's genetic sequencing data. And a lot of it comes with surveys that the people, have taken about their health. So you have a lot of health history, also just answering questions about, like eye color and height and athletic ability and things that are more subjective that people have taken a bunch of surveys for along with the product. So they have this rich data set that they're going to be able to maybe mine for new therapies. Kind of surprising 23andMe was not able to make use of that data set, but it'll be interesting to see what Regeneron does with it.
Any Lantheus news or Vertex pharmaceutical news?
Lantheus, kind of some tangential news. We follow a couple other companies. Well, GE Healthcare, they supply a lot of the hardware that ultimately runs the scans that Lantheus sells their radio diagnostics for. So they said the market for PET scan machines is very strong in the U.S. Similarly, we follow a company that runs imaging clinics across the U.S., and they also said the majority of their growth is coming from PET scans specifically and those related to prostate cancer and Alzheimer's. So the 2 places that Lantheus plays. So that's good long-term growth signals.
Also, it appears that our former president should have had the Pylarify scan.
Right. Anything on the pain medication in Vertex?
Yeah, so there's a competitor with a generic version of meloxicam. So, well, that is a generic. They have a reformulation of that medication that has gone through successfully through phase 3 studies. So the trials, you can't really compare apples to apples, but it does represent a competitor, which kind of was interesting because it came out of something that's been on the market for a long, long time. So we'll see how that progresses.
That's good. Well, we've run over a little bit, but we got started 2 minutes late. We're probably putting some pressure on the 3 of us to have these historical patterns to discuss to see whether there's anything that gives us some guide to the next 12, 18, 24 months. That's what we're going to try to do each 30-minute episode. Everyone stay well and stay healthy, and we'll be back here exactly 7 days from now. Take care.
The views expressed on this podcast are the hosts alone and do not constitute an offer to sell or a recommendation to purchase or a solicitation of an offer to buy any security nor a recommendation for any investment product or service. While certain information contained herein has been obtained from sources believed to be reliable, neither the hosts nor any of their employers or their affiliates have independently verified this information, and its accuracy and completeness cannot be guaranteed. Accordingly, no representation or warranty, expressed or implied, is made as to, and no reliance should be placed on, the fairness, accuracy, timeliness, or completeness of this information. The hosts and all employers and their affiliated persons assume no liability for this information and no obligation to update the information or analysis contained herein in the future, and may or may not hold positions in the securities mentioned.
Introducing the Top Mark Rankings. See who's leading the charge to LA 2028 and follow the journey of the top competitors. We're leveling the playing field for Olympic-class sailing. Whether you're a seasoned Olympian or a young laser sailor with big ambitions, this is your circuit. From North America's waters to the Olympic podium, it starts here. Join us, follow the action, and catch the next sailing superstar on their journey to the top. Top Mark Rankings, where Olympic dreams set sail, powered by Top Mark Capital.